Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. And welcome to today's Society of Authors event, Coffee with Tony Warner, which is part of our AGM Week online events. This event is part of our SOA at Home Autumn Winter 2021 Festival, the SOA series of online events launched in April 2020. My name is Njambi McGrath, and I am a comedian and author of the memoir Through the Leopard's Gaze. We'll be joined by Tony Warner. Tony Warner is our guest today. And all of our SOA events, home events, are free. But if you can afford to, please consider donating to the Authors Contingency Fund. And we suggest a minimum donation of £5. The fund is to support authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis. Please visit the links posted on the chat by our moderator, Sophia. Sophia will post the link, the following link on the chat bar, and that's for the donation. You can also help the contingency fund by making a purchase on the affiliated Blackwell's virtual store or bookstore, bookshop.org. And you can find the books by writers taking part in the SOA Home Festival. Sophia will also post the Blackwell's link in the chat bar. Sophia will also post the bookshop.org link in the chat bar. So this session will last 45 minutes, including a 15-minute Q&A at the end. The transcript, please do turn on the transcript option if you would like to live subtitles. There'll be a Q&A at the end, and please do post them in the Q&A box. You can post this anonymously if you prefer, but do post general comments in the chat box. So I would like to introduce our guest, Tony Warner. So Tony Warner is an author. He is also the co-founder and chair of the African Odyssey program. This grassroots initiative has been exhibiting African diaspora films on a monthly basis at the BFI Southbank Cinema for 15 years. He is also the founder of the Black History Walks in London, a group that explores the Caribbean and African history of the capital via 12 guided walks, talks, films, courses, bus tours, and river cruises. Tony is also the author of Black History Walks in London, Volume 1. The book explores the African and Caribbean presence in London over the last 2,000 years. He is also the co-author of the Pearson GCSE history textbook on migration and Black British civil rights for use in schools. The Black history section of the text was adopted from the Notting Hill walk he designed. It is the first time that this has happened, and most of the subjects covered in the text were never available for study. Wow, Tony Warner, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Wow, I'm astounded. And Chino Achebe once said that if you do not like the narrative, write your own. And clearly you are rewriting the narrative. So, Tony, how did it all begin?
Well, when it came to the walks, I'd done a whole bunch of the regular London tourist walks, like the Charles Dickens walk, the Underground walk, the Jack the Ripper walk, all these kind of typical London walks, and there was bus tours as well. And there was never any mention of any kind of Black history or Black people, and I was vexed, and I would complain for a very long time. And after a while of complaining, I thought, well, let me just do my own thing and set one up. And that was back in 2007, and we had kind of one walk at that time. And now we have like 12 walks on the bus to the river cruise, and that's how it started, because I was annoyed with the lack of Black history when it came to the regular mainstream walking tours.
That's incredible. So, because sometimes it takes you to be in a position to see what is presented of Black people. And then that was the catalyst for you to do this really astonishingly, brilliant thing that you're doing for Black people in this country, because our history is being completely overshadowed by the whitewashing of everything. So how has the last 18 months been for you?
Well, it was a time of, change and growth and contemplation. And because, well, first of all, we couldn't do any kind of physical activities, couldn't do any walks, obviously, couldn't do any kind of film shows or bus tours, whatever. We had to stop doing all that stuff. And then we had to navigate into using this platform, this Zoom thing, because when I first heard of Zoom, I was like, what what is Zoom? How does it even work? And I had to we had to work out how to use it, how to get people on board online, etc. That was a learning curve. And then because we had a lot of time at home, well, I spent a lot of time reading the books that I had left over here that I had not had time to read because I was out on the street walking about. So it was a lot of book reading, a lot of learning new technology, and also a bit of time spent writing as well, and kind of planning for or trying to anticipate what would happen when the pandemic was quote unquote over, which is still ongoing, obviously.
Yeah, I suppose it was a moment to take stock, and you clearly used that time wisely, again, restocking on your knowledge and doing some writing. What sort of things were you writing?
I was writing articles mostly for my newsletter. We have a newsletter that goes out every month or so, and it lists all the events that are coming up. So each newsletter is a bit of history as well, because I record what's happening in present day society, and also the events that we run. It might be a walk, talk, or film. What we'll do is we'll have each event will be historical in its own right. So I might talk about Kenya, for example. I might talk about the Land and Freedom Party of the Mau Mau in a particular issue, and the next issue I'll talk about the Brixton situation in '81. So each of those newsletters is writing and recording history. Also, it's, I suppose, making history, because when you review them over the last 15 years, there's a whole bunch of archive and documentation in just the newsletters.
I mean, it's incredible just reading some of the stuff that you have written in the textbook. I mean, even I'm such an enthusiast when it comes to Black history. Some of the stuff that in that textbook I wasn't even aware of, and especially you share this letter that was written to the activist in the Notting Hill, and that letter was, I mean, it made me laugh. It was a letter from the KKK, and it was addressed to Mr. D. Ape, and this was from Mr. A. White man. Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Well, that letter was sent to Claudia Jones when she had her newspaper, the West Indian Gazette, based in Brixton. But the paper was kind of a national paper, which united the Black community and helped to kind of raise the issues. And that was at a time when Black people were being attacked in the street in the Notting Hill situation there, where they then fought back, which is then called rioting. So that's the 50s. And of course, in the 50s in Kenya, we know what's happening. Well, I say some people know what's happening there, in that the British are trying to put down this rebellion by the Land and Freedom Army, thereby renaming it the Mau Mau, call them terrorists, etc., even though they're trying to fight freedom in their own country. So all those things link together, because there's a similar situation here when it comes to the Black population, how they're being treated, how they're being misnamed and misrecorded by the mainstream here. And then what's happening in Kenya with our Africans there are being misnamed and misreported and mislabeled over there too. So I found that history fascinating. And as far as the GCSE book is concerned, it's the first time ever that kids in school are going to learn about Claudia Jones or the Notting Hill riots or Baron Baker or Frank Critchlow, the Mangrove Line, or the Black Day of Action. So that book by itself is revolutionary. And like I said, the kids in school now will get an understanding as to what's been happening here in this country for the last 50, 60 years, as opposed to Luther King in America, which is what they normally hear about.
Yeah, it's so interesting in that Black history is kind of the same world over. So I'm certainly from Kenya, and like you mentioned, the London Freedom, I'm in Mau Mau. So my mother actually was in the concentration camps created by the British. In the same time that the Black people are fighting for their freedom, for their right to exist in Britain. And this is a really important work that you're doing, bringing this to youngsters so they can see their struggle and where they've come from, and that Black people have not been docile, sitting back, waiting for equality to come to them, that they have fought tooth and nail. So you talk about, you just mentioned about the Mangrove 9. Can you just maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Mangrove. Well, first of all, the Mangrove was a restaurant run by a guy called Frank Critchlow, Trinidadian guy. He had a restaurant in All Saints Road. And that restaurant wasn't just a restaurant to eat food, and it was like a center for Black power and Black activism. And apart from that, it was a center for all these kind of big, high-profile stars to go and hang out. So Bob Marley went there, Muhammad Ali went there, Diana Ross went there, Marvin Gaye went there. Imagine all those big stars in Notting Hill in the 70s, but they went there. So it shows you something about the charisma of the place. So Frank Critchlow was offering free legal advice to young Black men who'd been unfairly arrested by the police under what is called the Sus Law. And because of that and other reasons, police did not like him. So they'd raid his venue on a regular basis, like, practically once a month. And then people like Darcus Howe and other Black people in the area demonstrated against the police harassment. Then they got arrested and charged with riot. And basically it was a it was a plot by the mainstream authorities to shut them up and lock them up and stop them providing leadership to the Black community. So that trial was called the Mangrove 9. And basically the Black people won their case in court, which was a huge victory and a major turning point when it came to what you could call Black British civil rights activism.
I mean, you're bringing all these stories to the forefront. I certainly had no idea of any of this. I was actually reading your textbook and thinking, where was this textbook when I was at school? Because I would have massively benefited in seeing that Black people were fighting for their rights in Egypt, in Africa, in America, in Britain, and no doubt in many places around the world, including, South America. Now, you are coming at this from all angles. And I absolutely love that. So you do the Black British or the African Odyssey film program. Can you again tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I just thought of something to answer your previous question about what has happened in 2020. So in 2020, I was watching the news like other people and looking at this kind of global revolution when it came to Black activism, Black power, and human rights, I should say. And that, of course, influenced what happened in this year, because I'm fairly sure that if it wasn't for 2020, that GCSE book would never have been produced. I'm fairly sure that would not happen, because the history in it has been true for like 50, 60, 70 years, and it's never been put on the GCSE agenda before. So I'm fairly sure that 2020 had a lot to do with it. As far as the African Odysseys program is concerned, the way I started showing films is that I was working as a mentor with Black children up in North London, and the Black kids had no knowledge of Black history at all. So long story short, to kind of educate and inspire them, I wanted to put on films in the youth center to show the kids so they could see there's a huge aspect of Black history that weren't being taught in schools. But it was really difficult to get a TV in there. Long story short, I just thought, you know what, let me just hire a cinema. So I hired the Real Cinema in Hackney. This is back in 2001. 400-seat cinema, and I said, if you want to come to the event for free, just bring a child. So as an adult, if you want to get in for free, just bring a child. And that's what kicked off this whole African Odyssey thing. So basically, I started off showing films in cinemas, and then I met people like David Somerset and other people who were interested in films as well. And then we had this kind of agreement to actually show films at the BFI Southbank from 2007, which has been a huge success.
Oh, wow. I mean, what a great thing to do, because like I was just going through all the films that you put on there, and I'm only aware of one, and that's Coming to America. But, there's lots of other films there that would, just to show that, Black people are creative. And finally, we have fought for everything that we've got, and we are in the limelight, and we are, our narrative is, coming from a very dark, difficult place of struggle. And our voices are being heard. Like you say, 2020 was a pivotal year for Black history, Black narrative. And I mean, congratulations and well done on this. But
I should mention just briefly, again, when it comes to the films that we show films from the African diaspora. So it could be from the Bahamas, from Brazil, from Kenya, from Botswana. We show films from the whole African diaspora once a month, normally on a Saturday between 2 and 5 p.m. So we show the film itself, then have a Q&A after it. And the films we show are normally ignored by the mainstream. So we show some amazing, fantastic films. We make sure to have a Q&A afterwards to kind of give them more value. And to give an example, we had a whole season on Kenya. This is about 10 years ago. We're looking at the people like Field Marshal Mutonyi, people like, other people who were active at the time, and linked it into the British history. So we show films that are almost literally banned by the mainstream. We show them at BFI once all along for the last 15 years. It's the only cinema in the country that actually have this setup, the only one in the whole country.
Yeah, and you can see why they would want to ban those films, because, like, especially, the British have never admitted to having concentration camps in Kenya. I know my own mother gave birth in a concentration camp, and I know when I was trying to publish my book, everybody rejected it. They said such stories are not welcome here in this country. But you are taking the bull by the horns, and you are bringing those films there. The first film that I ever saw ever in my whole entire life was an African film called Love Brewed in the African Pot. Love Brewed in the African Pot. So maybe it's an astonishing film. It's a Ghanaian film, and it's a love story basically, and that would be an amazing one. Perhaps maybe because like I've never seen it anywhere else. So stuff like that, you're finding a home for things like that, which is just an amazing thing to be doing. Now, you are, again, published the Black History Works Volume 1, and I like that it's Volume 1 because there's more volumes to come, which is an amazing thing. Can you tell us a bit more about this book?
Well, that book has been delayed, so I can't say much about it. But other than it being delayed, I can say that I took 2.5 of our walks and made it into a book format. So there's about, several hundred pictures in there, there's a couple of maps in there, and we basically take people around London using words on a paper as opposed to using words from someone's mouth. And we show people the connections between this city right here and the Caribbean, be it Barbados, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Dominica, etc., to Africa, be it Ghana, Nigeria. We show people the connections because the connections are just literally everywhere if we know what to look for. And that we kind of just give people back the history that should be there in the first place. In effect, that's what I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you go about doing your research? Because I was very surprised when I was doing my own research that the Black history books are not obviously present, and I didn't think that they existed, but I was very surprised to find that there's a plethora of stuff about Black history, but they are very well hidden. So how do you go about doing your research, and where do you find this information?
Well, I think, as you mentioned already, the best research, from my perspective, is speaking to old people. You find you see, exactly, you know what I'm talking about. You find the oldest person in your family, and you just ask them, granny, granddad, uncle, what were you doing at 12, at 21, at 32? Just ask them questions every 10 years of their life and listen to what they're telling you, and your head will explode. Yeah. The history is right there in your family. That's the best research for me, because once you hear from your dad that this happened at that time, that's when you can go and do the research in your archives. But for me, it starts off with finding the oldest person in your family, ask them a question, and that's what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, 100% what you say, because when I was doing my own research, I would ask a question and I'll get an answer and I'll be like, what on earth was that? Seriously. And I found out, obviously, there are places like the London Library, which has loads, but then even something like that is only members, so you have to pay a subscription, which is quite difficult, obviously, if money is an issue for anybody. And I just found that, accessing this Black history, and especially if you want to have a bibliography at the end of your book, can be quite challenging. But there are sources, and if you look hard enough, Black history is very well documented, especially in academia. Universities have a wonderful resource. I found that when I applied to Yale, they let me have an access to their database, and you find astonishing stuff on there. But what keeps inspiring you to keep going? Because obviously you've done all of this, but you keep going. What keeps inspiring you to keep going?
Well, I should mention Jacaranda books when it comes to publishing, because if it wasn't for them, I don't think my book would be published either. And actually, I think you're on the same label as me. You're on Jacaranda, and they had something called 20 in 2020, which meant they were going to publish 20 Black authors in 2020. And of course, it got messed up because of virus. But that history is right there, because you can think of all the big publishers, all the big five, they never published 20 Black authors in 1 year. It's only Jacaranda, and Jacaranda is a small publishing house. But as far as inspiration is concerned, well, I mean, I suppose it's partly, again, family, in that when I'm having a quote unquote hard time, I think about, my dad and my mum and the sort of things they had to go through in the 60s and 70s for me to be here speaking to you. And I think, well, if my dad and my mum could get through what they did back in the 70s, I've got no excuse. Let me just kind of build on their legacy and platform, make them proud of me, and make sure that, this history that's been covered up, denied, is I'm going to make sure people know about it.
You have a platform and you're able to use it to the best of your advantage, because, like, thinking about, the people that you talk about, the activists in Notting Hill, and the fact that the only places they could meet up is in people's living rooms because they could not hire anywhere. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, quite apart from hiring, they had a hard time getting a place to live, because at this time, we're talking 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, there were signs that would say no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, literally on windows, in pubs, in newspapers. So it's hard to get a place to live. If you did get a place to live, it would be a rundown, shabby area, which is, normally in a kind of bombed out, rough place. And you were paying 2 or 3 times the rent. So when it came to hiring venues like, public venues or halls, etc., you also had that problem too. So to have a meeting to discuss Black history, for example, well, that was a problem, because if you were to get a venue, and this happened to me, by the way, it's happened to me in the 21st century, you pay your money to use the venue. You're in there speaking about concentration camps in Kenya, for argument's sake, right? And somebody walk past, oh, no, that never happened. No, I don't like that. And you can't book that venue again. Despite you paying your money for it, despite the fact being historically true and documented, if people in the venue don't like what you're talking about, you can't get the venue again. And that's happened to me in the 21st century, far less than 1959.
I can believe that, because when we had, I gave an interview about my mom and my grandma being in a concentration camp, and somebody, woman, came afterwards and asked whether that was true or was telling lies. I was like, of course I was telling lies. Why else would I tell the truth? And so this is incredible. Now, Tony, what is your writing process? How do you go about this?
Writing process. It's like it's not like J.K. Rowling or some kind of well-known author that does a whole bunch of books. I've done a bit of writing, and as far as my process is concerned, what I'll do is I'll get my laptop, I'll find a quiet place. I might go to the library, I might go to just some sort of quiet place, and I'll sit down and write. And also, I suppose I kind of sketch it out beforehand. So I might be on the tube train, on the tube, whatever, and I'll just kind of get a little piece of paper, like this or whatever, and I'll just write down things on it, and that'll be my structure, so to speak. And then when I get home, I'll add to it, and then I'll do the kind of the reference checking and the bibliography later on, and after a while, I've got a little something to write, or something published, or it's not published, but something written.
Yeah. So I suppose the moment you write it down, it kind of then refocuses your mind, because sometimes you think of something, and then if you don't write it down, it disappears. And when you sit down with your laptop ready to write, it's completely disappeared.
It's true. And also, I just thought of something, and because I'm always doing these walking tours, and I'm speaking to people, I'm like an oral historian. So sometimes I can just write down what I would say verbally. And that's kind of what I've done in the book mostly, because I took the information that I'd normally be speaking to people face to face, and I've written it down. So that's part of my process too, which is different to most people, I suppose, because most people aren't walking about talking for 2 hours at a time, but I do.
What's interesting that you mentioned that you're a narrator when you do all these history works, because in Kenya there was something that we called the Geshari Poets. These were people that would go around the country just giving oral history, and this is something that has existed since medieval times. Yeah. And you literally are doing what has been done since the medieval times, just being the orator. So. Yeah.
I think they call them griots, griots, griots in West Africa. That's what they're called. But there's this long history of these people who would travel around, and they'd maintain the history in their heads, and they'd tell stories to keep people entertained, and also to pass on the knowledge that they had in their heads. So I suppose I'm kind of doing something similar.
Yeah, but not only are you doing that, but also you're putting it down in books. So that 100 years from now, people can actually read about you. This is what you used to do, but also did you put them down in writing? Because this is the biggest problem that we've had in Africa, is the documentation. Although we have a lot of written stuff that is not been acknowledged, but we have a lot of written stuff, and hopefully in time is going to be acknowledged.
And also, doesn't that guy, the famous Kenyan writer, Ngui, thank you, right? Doesn't he make sure now to write his books in the original native Kenyan languages as opposed to English? Is that right?
Yeah. So even when he received some award and he gave his interview in Gikuyu, because he was like, why, when an Englishman writes a book, he gives his interviews in English. Why would I, a Kenyan person, give an interview in English? So he gave it in Gikuyu. And I love that, because, all the other people do it. The Japanese do it, everybody else does it, but it's us, we Africans, that we feel like we have to communicate in a language that will make us be understood. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o has been an important person in telling that narrative, the Kenyan narrative, especially history, and even the history of colonialism, which has been by and large whitewashed in history. So, Tony, do you have any advice for writers, script writers, or poets who are just starting out?
Advice? I would just say that if you got a story to tell, then write it down. It's very practical because as far as I'm concerned, what did I do? I had a story, and actually, it's a good point because people were asking, they were begging me, telling me, commanding me to write a book for like ages, a long time. They were trying to do something in writing, and I never really took them on board. So I suppose one thing to help people would be to, well, maybe listen to your friends if they're trying to encourage you, and take your knowledge seriously. Yes, take what you know seriously, and commit to the process. So it might be long and boring and tedious, because that's part of writing too, I would have thought. But I'm telling you, it's long, boring, tedious. But yeah, you have to kind of commit to the process and stick it through and be disciplined and maintain your interest and composure.
Because only you can tell us your story. We don't know what your story is. And I think a lot of people, they may have a story and think, I'm not able to do it. Will people want to read me or whatever? Let the people be the judge, put it down in writing, like Tony says, be dedicated and get your story out there. But so also,
one more thing. Also, I mean, like nowadays you got nurses because you can record your story. You can just talk it to the camera or whatever. It's like what we're doing now. There's technology that you can actually just talk to the machine, whatever, and it will write down your words. So you have no excuse when it comes to documenting your stories.
What has revolutionized my writing is I found something on Word called Readback. So it reads for you, because like when you're exhausted or sometimes when you're reading your own work, you miss typos and errors and stuff like that.
All the time.
So I turn it on and it reads me back what I've written, and I found that incredible. So, Tony, what are you reading at the moment?
Tell you what, right? I'm reading, actually, there's a guy called Carlos Acosta, a fantastic Black ballet dancer from Cuba. Amazing talent, amazing life story. Listen, this guy grew up in poverty in Cuba. His dad forced him into ballet, didn't like ballet at all. He kind of became interested in, and now he's like, apart from being a world famous dancer, he wrote a book, best-selling book. He made a movie, best-selling movie called Yuli, and he's presently the director of the Royal National Ballet in Birmingham. And I'm reading his book. That's one of the books I'm reading. And I'm also reading another book by Professor Paul Gilroy about Black history in the UK. And there's another book by a guy called Stephen Bourne about Black British theatre history. So I'm reading 3 books at the same time.
I find that I do the same through different mediums. So like when I go for my walks in the morning, I listen to a book. Just before I go to sleep, I read a different type of books. I find that, and obviously during the day, I kind of read several things. But I've been finding that reading Memoirs of Colonialism is very interesting. They are horrific, but you get little gems of information that you wouldn't have got, but then you also understand the mentality of white supremacists, basically. And so I found that also to be another way of doing research, which has been weird. It's like listening to people insult you, but then inside all of that, there's quite a few gems right there. So it's now time for Q&A. If we've got any questions, but we have a question here that was sent to us. That's typical. Sorry, everyone. So we have a question here for you, Tony, and this question is from Aram Sayed, and it says, "My name is Ms. Aram Sayed. I'm Pakistani." This is typical. I am so sorry. So sorry about that. So it says, "My name is Ms. Aram Sayed. I'm a Pakistani born in this country. I feel Black History Month is essential to celebrate diversity. I'm a new author. Do you think, as I do, positive images in children's books, including discussing contentious issues such as racism, inequality, alongside positive narrative, is essential?"
Yes. That's simple. That's a simple question. I'll answer. But yeah, of course it is. Definitely, 100% positive imagery is very, very important, and it's good to have discussions with children about these issues that they're going to face anyhow. Because we know for a fact that when it comes to racism, kids are experiencing it at least as young as 5, if not younger. There's a whole bunch of documentation on that. So no point delaying the argument until they get, or the discussion until they get older, because they experience it from the time, as I say, at least 5, we have evidence, documented scientific evidence of them experiencing discrimination in nurseries or primary schools, just walking on the street, and even watching TV, because you get a whole bunch of racism from TV. So yes.
Well, the thing is that if children are not seeing a representation of themselves, they start to become insecure. All they ever see is they see white people doing all of this, and then they will ask Black children, "How do you feel about yourself?" Obviously, then if they never see themselves represented in a positive way, obviously they feel insecure. They think, "Why am I not seeing myself in there?"
Yeah, and there's a legacy of colonization even in Africa. When I went to Kibera, this is like 15 years ago now. I went to Kibera in East Africa, in Kenya, and I went to a school in the Kibera area, which is, of course, well known for poverty. But in that school, they had all these books, and the books were Dick and Jane, and how they ate marmalade, and how they had a dog called Spot. It was all white history books, white kids' books that had been given to them from the kind of the elite schools, international schools in Kenya, that were then handed down to these little Black kids in Kibera. And all the reading about was, marmalade and jam and toast, stuff that had nothing to do with them at all. I was astonished.
Yeah, and what frustrates me is that even like a lot of the African politicians don't actually see the necessity of making this information available to actually Black African children. And one of my biggest regrets growing up in Kenya is that everything I read was white. And it's only now that I'm actually discovering the Black literature and all of this that should have been made available to us. People like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, I suppose he is the only one, but there's amazing history and all of this that could be made available. So I feel so frustrated about African leaders as well. But we have something here. It says from the Q&A, it says, Tony, loved hearing your cinema strategy. Wondering if you might have a way of approaching validation of oral histories, which we could collect and share.
Way of validating them. Well, off the top of my head, way of validating them could be you dictate your story to a camera in your house, and then you give that video footage to a web. In fact, give it to me, because we have a website. We have a YouTube channel. It's called youtube.com/Black History Wars. And on that channel, we have about 200, or actually, that's right. Good point, because we have recently begun to record our lectures. So you can go to that channel now and you can see at least 15 different lectures we've done, which is basically an oral history that you can just access by listening to it or watching it. So as far as to give validation to what you just said there, I would record your history orally or visually, because that's even better, because people like to see your face when they're listening, right? It helps, right? And then you put your history on your channel, and that's your validation documentation. That's one way of doing it. And also, of course, you can then transcribe the oral history into a written history and do a little book from it. And again, you can publish it on your own website. You don't have to wait for any big publisher to come to you. You can do it yourself nowadays. So this is one advantage of having the internet, which you didn't have like 50 years ago.
Yeah, and things like Instagram videos do very well, and social media and YouTube and all of that. So we have a question here from Rashida. In what way did writing your book change you?
Change me? I would say one thing is that it kind of made me respect my parents and my uncles and the guys that come before me a lot more. Because when you have to sit down and read through what they went through and then process it yourself and think about it yourself, because your parents don't always tell you the stuff they went through. I can say for a fact that my mom and dad did not tell me all the stuff they had to go through. When I read these books and novels and did the research off of the little bits they did tell me, I was like, oh my goodness, you guys really had it hard. So it made me respect my elders a lot more and appreciate my role in telling their story accurately and faithfully for the future generations.
And it's interesting that you say that, because my own mother used to tell me things about her life in a concentration camp, but it didn't register. She used to tell me we were starving, we had no food. And I'd be like, why didn't you just eat? It's only when I actually sat down as a grown-up and I was writing my memoir that I thought, oh, this is what you were trying to tell me all along. So sometimes parents trying to tell their children things, their children are always like, go on and on, But that's so interesting. Hi, Tony. This is some encouragement. Would you ever create a film? As writers sometimes transfer books to films. And thanks for your great work so far. And that is from Amanda.
Yes, I would do a film, and I've done a couple of short documentaries, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, etc. You can find them on the same YouTube channel, and have definitely thought or planned to do some sort of, documentary on Black History Walks as an organization and where it started, where it is, and a moment where it could be in the future, etc. So yes, and yes, and yes.
Okay. Great. Oh, so Annie said to the first question that I asked about validating oral history, she said, I mean that written texts are still the standard. The standard. Perhaps we are moving to oral visual forms, and could that also help younger people interact with the material and learn more?
Yes. Again, simple answer. Yeah, it could, and yeah, because children like to hear stories. I mean, you go to any child's kind of group. They're telling stories all day long. It might be going to the moon or whatever, but we can include that history into our children's stories. In fact, there's a whole bunch of Kenyan African fables that are not part of the European lexicon, but they're definitely valuable, definitely educational, definitely kind of inspiring. So you can go to any African or any Caribbean country, you can hear about the Anansi stories, but there's a massive amount of oral literature, if that's the right term, that is present right now in Africa. It just needs to be kind of embraced and exposed and explored and kind of distributed.
Of course. So now Jane McKenzie asks you, are your works open to white people?
I'm sorry to laugh, but yes, of course they are. I mean, can you imagine? There's no sign saying no whites allowed. I would get in trouble with me. We have all white groups sometimes. Sometimes at the cinema, we have we're showing a film on Paul Robeson, and the audience of 400 is 350 white people who are in their 70s watching Paul Robeson. So yes, white people can come too. Ain't a problem. Ooh.
Yeah, well, the thing is that white people must be part of the narrative. They must be, because when people learn all these things, then they will understand their place, their position, and how the affliction of Black people. And it is important. And thank you so much, Jane. And yes, please come to all the works, because the more white people that can come and learn our Black history, the better it is for each one of us. So yeah, let me see if we've got any more questions. I think we are going to be winding up in just a minute. But Tony, any wisdom for anybody that feels frustrated by the portrayal of Black people, how the Black narrative that is put out there. So such people are frustrated, but they feel that they've got no power to do anything. And what you have demonstrated to us is that you have the power to actually change that narrative by creating this information. What piece of wisdom can you pass on to somebody like that who is feeling frustrated and that they wish that they could do something to make a difference?
Wisdom about making a difference? Well, I would just pick on any kind of famous Black leader and think about what they have achieved and think about how they started. Like Luther King is an easy example, but you think about, or even Chinua Achebe or Mandela or any of those well-known characters. In fact, forget them. Let's hope your own grandmother or your own grandfather. You think about where your grandmother started and where you are right now, and you can see the inspiration in that. Just find out about, like I say, the oldest person in your family, in particular your grandparents, it could be your uncle, and think about life, what was like for them when they were your age, and see where you are now compared to them. And then you can understand the relationship between what they were able to go through to give you the life you have now.
Mm-hmm. So we have Alison Leonard. I was a social worker in Hackney in the 1960s, and I was cruppeted. I needed to have these works then so that I could understand a bit about the Caribbean culture of people living in Hackney. And well done, trying to inform yourself. That's amazing, Alison. And then we have Nick here that's saying, thank you so much, Njambi and Tony, for sharing your experiences so vividly, and Society of Authors for organizing things. Well, you are most welcome. And sorry, I should say I am white, of course. That's okay. This is an inclusive talk. This is why Tony does this talk, so that everybody can be informed, Black or white, all sorts of people can be informed about our history and the struggles of Black people that have taken place, whichever country we are in. We are not immune to racism. We share the exact same history. I'm from Kenya, and here Black British people here have been experiencing the same things, even the Windrush generation being deported. And you talk about this in your textbook, which is so necessary and important for young people today to understand your the narrative and the discourse of what is taking place currently. Okay.
You should mention your book, Njambi. What's your book called? Where can people get it from?
Okay, so my book is called Through the Leopard's Gaze, and it's a memoir of self-discovery about how my whole entire tribe and how my entire family were put in concentration camps by the British government. And my own mother actually gave birth there, but we didn't actually know, and I didn't actually know about this personal trauma, which manifested later on in my life. And this is why I began writing the book. It's called Through the Leopard's Gaze. And like Tony said, it was published as part of the 20 in 20 by Jacaranda, because all the publishers refused to publish my memoir. They say that British people are not interested in such stories. And Valerie Brandes from Jacaranda, she decided to publish stories because she felt that we needed to have a platform. And as you can see from what Tony is doing, there's so many stories that need to be told. And I just would like to thank you so much. One piece of wisdom, one last thing that you would like to say, Tony?
I'd like to say that Through the Leopard's Gaze has been commissioned, made the TV series coming shortly. So watch out for that.
Thank you so much, Tony. Okay, so just to conclude, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Tony for being such an amazing guest, and his work, I'm sure you will agree, is going to make a positive change in the Black narrative, especially to young people, because now that's gone into their textbooks, and that is a big, big, big win for us. I would also like to thank you for participating, for joining us, and thank you to Sophia, the moderator that is kind of behind, in the background, doing all these links and all of that stuff.